For 12 years, the German public was sold a very specific image of Adolf Hitler. They were told their Führer was an infallible genius, a tireless mastermind whose office light never turned off as he worked day and night to build the Third Reich. The historical reality is far more mundane. Hitler was a dilettante who despised a 9-to-5 schedule and possessed almost no capacity for long-term intellectual effort. His inner circle knew he rarely worked and routinely failed to finish reading a 20-page file. Rather than govern, he preferred to retreat to his mountain chalet. He would isolate himself from the mechanics of statecraft for weeks at a time, hovering above the actual work of running a country like a detached artist. If the supreme leader was functionally incompetent and avoided administration, how did Germany conquer half of Europe and build an industrialized machine of mass murder? To bridge the gap between his grand visions and his own laziness, Hitler spent 15 years recruiting a specific brand of lieutenant, desperately ambitious, ruthless men who were willing to do the heavy lifting for him. This organizational chart represents Hitler's deliberate management strategy. Instead of clear chains of command, he assigned overlapping jurisdictions to his lieutenants. He wanted his inner circle to constantly fight each other for his approval. To win favor, these subordinates had to outdo one another in cruelty and efficiency, accelerating the regime's worst atrocities through a race to the bottom. Early on, the Nazi Party lacked prestige. Hermann Göring fixed that. As an aristocratic World War I flying ace, he provided immediate social credibility and access to high society donors who could finance the movement's rise. Göring became the regime's blunt instrument. He established the political police, built the Luftwaffe from scratch, and opened the very first concentration camps, like Dachau, using forced labor to silence political opponents. While Göring supplied the muscle, a failed writer named Joseph Goebbels provided the psychological control. Goebbels found his purpose in inventing the very myth of the infallible Führer that Hitler was unable to embody on his own. Appointed chief of propaganda, Goebbels set out to eradicate competing thoughts. He orchestrated massive public ceremonies to burn books by Jewish or dissident authors, making cultural destruction a core part of the national identity. He choreographed colossal rallies to present Hitler as a messiah. By whipping the population into a hysterical frenzy, he manufactured the national consent required for total war. Göring and Goebbels successfully handled the physical and intellectual work the Führer avoided, making a fringe extremist movement look like a viable government. As the empire expanded, Hitler needed someone to materialize his megalomaniacal daydreams. He found Albert Speer, a young architect who proved he could deliver results ahead of schedule. Speer was tasked with rebuilding Berlin into a new capital called Germania. To satisfy Hitler's ego, Speer designed a great hall with a dome 16 times larger than St. Peter's in Rome, a project that required raising 50,000 apartments during a severe housing shortage. When the war turned against Germany, Speer took over weapons manufacturing. To evade Allied bombing, he moved production into massive underground tunnel networks, maintaining output by ruthlessly exploiting tens of thousands of concentration camp prisoners who were worked to death as slaves. While Speer industrialized production, Heinrich Himmler industrialized murder. A meticulous bureaucrat, Himmler took Hitler's virulent anti-Semitism and engineered the logistics of the final solution. Himmler introduced gassing specifically to spare his SS killers from the psychological trauma of mass shootings. He prioritized the mental health of his executioners, seeking a technical method to murder millions without requiring his men to witness their victims' faces. To execute this plan, Himmler empowered ground-level commanders like Rudolf Höss, who oversaw the extermination of over 1 million people at Auschwitz. Höss ran this death factory while living in a comfortable villa with his wife and 5 children, just yards away from the crematorium. Speer and Himmler integrated architectural dreams and racist policy into the state, creating a highly efficient, self-sustaining machine of death. By the spring of 1945, the illusion shattered completely. Allied forces reduced Berlin to rubble, trapping Hitler deep inside his subterranean chancellery bunker. The moment the myth of invincibility broke, the loyalty of his inner circle evaporated. Both Göring and Himmler abandoned the Führer, fleeing the capital to secretly negotiate surrender with the Allies in a desperate bid to save their own lives. When they realized no deals would be made, neither man was willing to face accountability. Rather than stand before a judge, both Goering and Himmler chose to bite down on cyanide capsules. Albert Speer took a different path to survival. At the Nuremberg trials, he masterfully manipulated the court, denying any knowledge of the Holocaust. He served 20 years in prison and successfully reinvented himself as the apologetic good Nazi, dodging the hangman's noose through calculated deceit. But Joseph Goebbels refused to run. He had become so completely consumed by the myth he fabricated that he saw no possible future without Nazism. He and his wife poisoned their 6 children before committing suicide just hours after Hitler. Absolute evil on a civilizational scale doesn't emerge from a single tyrant alone. It requires a competitive ecosystem of enablers, men perfectly willing to trade their humanity for a share of power.